You ever wake up thinking the world is just fine, only to have it smirk back at you by sundown? That was the kind of day this all started. The sky was the color of faded denim, stretched over a small town where secrets bake under the sun and nobody dares speak them aloud. I'd just come in from feeding the hogs, sweat soaking the collar of my shirt, when I caught Mary standing by the kitchen window, staring out like she was waiting on a train that would never come. Something about the way the light hit her face, soft, but with eyes too sharp for a woman born into dirt and dust, made my gut shift. See, I worked the same land my daddy did, and his daddy before him. A small farm, nothing fancy. Broken fence posts, honest calluses, and corn that listens better than most folks around here. My name's Luke. I don't ask for much. Just rain when the ground's dry and a little warmth in my wife's eyes. She and I grew up on the same dead-end road, rode bikes together as kids, kissed under the bleachers in high school. I thought I knew every corner of her heart. Turns out, there were rooms in there I'd never been invited into. Lately, Mary's been floating through the house like a ghost with a lipstick budget. She's always dreamed of more, of somewhere louder, glossier, where the coffee doesn't taste like burnt bark and the most exciting thing in a week isn't who got their truck stuck in the creek. I tried. God knows I did. I fixed up the porch swing she loved, brought her wildflowers every Friday, even learned how to make that ridiculous green smoothie she saw in some magazine. She drank it once, smiled like I was a sweet child, and poured the rest down the sink when she thought I wasn't looking. Then he came. The suit. Drove into town in a black car that looked like it belonged in a James Bond flick, not on our cracked asphalt roads. He said he was here to invest in potential, which is city slicker talk for, I want your land, and I'll smile while I steal it. Name was Grayson Cole. Real estate tycoon or corporate thief, depends on who you ask. I didn't like him the second I saw his shoes. Shiny leather like he'd never stepped in a cow pie in his life. Men like that don't come to towns like ours unless they want something. And he wanted something, all right. First, he sweet-talked the town council, buying dinner for the mayor and sliding his card across tables like it was dipped in gold. Then he started showing up more often. At the diner. At church. At our farm. Always just stopping by, he said, admiring the view. But his gaze wasn't on the fields. It was on Mary. Mary, with her red sundress and that sudden interest in putting on perfume before she walked down to the mailbox. She said it made her feel awake. I knew that scent, jasmine and trouble. She laughed more when he was around, a high, breathy sound I hadn't heard in months. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself a lot of things. But a man knows when he's being replaced, when the soil beneath his feet starts feeling borrowed, not earned. And still, I said nothing. Because love, real love, the kind that gets under your fingernails and stings when you bleed, makes a man hold on long after he should let go. I kept fixing tractors and mending fences while Mary drifted further out to sea, her heart tied to a man who probably didn't know the first thing about a harvest. I watched them talk at the farmer's market, watched her eyes light up like someone had finally found the switch I'd been fumbling for in the dark. But there was one thing Grayson didn't know. I'm not just some backwoods hick in muddy boots. I read people better than I read the sky, and I've learned that when someone's trying to rob you of everything, you don't beg them to stop. You outsmart them. And I'd already started digging, not in the fields, but into his past. The kind of digging that uncovers more than roots. I could feel the storm brewing. The kind that doesn't show up in forecasts. The kind that wrecks lives. And I'd be ready. You know what they say about trouble, it never travels alone, always brings friends, and always shows up just when you start to think maybe things ain't so bad after all. That summer the sky burned a little too blue, the crops a little too dry, and Mary's eyes a little too far away. I used to find her humming to herself while snapping green beans or brushing dust off the windowsill, but these days she stared at her phone like it was a portal to salvation. She followed women who wore expensive sunglasses and never repeated an outfit, who filmed themselves sipping oat milk lattes in cafes where a single pastry cost more than my monthly feed bill. She watched videos of high-rise apartments, of women laughing with men who never had dirt under their nails, of glittering parties and rooms full of art pieces that looked like paint had given up and fallen over. I once asked her what was so interesting about watching strangers pretend their lives were perfect. She didn't answer, just smiled without moving her mouth and scrolled a little faster. One night she played a video with a catchy song, something about leaving your small-town roots behind and chasing the skyline. She mouthed the lyrics. That night I went out and sat on the tractor long after sundown, just staring at the same field my grandfather once bled into trying to keep afloat. Now, Grayson Cole, the businessman in the polished shoes, he noticed things. That's what men like him do. They don't blink unless it benefits them. He saw the way Mary looked at him. He saw the chipped paint on our barn, the hesitation in my voice when I said the harvest might be better next year. He saw everything and said nothing, and that silence was worse than any lie. At first he played it casual. Stopped by the market, complimented Mary's new dress, asked how we were doing. Later he brought up how the county was developing, how the land out here was undervalued. Said it with a grin that made your skin itch. I told him I wasn't interested. This land wasn't just soil. It was memory. It was my father's sweat and my mother's voice echoing from the porch. But men like him don't hear no, they hear not yet. A few weeks later I got a letter from the township. Legal language wrapped in fake sympathy. Some zoning loophole buried in the fine print of a land ordinance from the 1950s, dusted off and sharpened like a blade. Said my deed had a flaw. Said my claim wasn't as airtight as I thought. I went to the county clerk's office, thinking there had to be some mistake. I left with a folder of forms and the gut-punch realization that the land I was born on could be bought out from under me by someone who'd never spent a night listening to the wind through broken fence boards. Grayson had found a weak spot and pressed until the whole foundation cracked. Mary didn't cry. She didn't rage. She didn't say a single word. She just set her phone down and asked if it was done. I told her it wasn't over yet. I'd hired a lawyer, someone from the next town over who'd dealt with land disputes before. Mary just nodded and went back to her scrolling. That was the first real sign, but I missed it. I still believed she was in this with me. That we'd fight together. Foolish of me, really. The same week the county transferred ownership, Mary's wardrobe changed. City clothes. Sharp lines. Sunglasses she never took off, even indoors. She started going into town more, meeting people, spending hours at the library claiming she needed Wi-Fi. I wanted to ask questions, but every time I looked at her I remembered the girl who used to ride shotgun in my truck barefoot, singing along to the radio with her feet on the dash. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone who smelled like perfume I couldn't pronounce and looked at me like I was a burden she was tired of carrying. The divorce papers came in a plain envelope, no note, no explanation. Just her signature where love used to live. She didn't even hand them to me. Left them on the kitchen table beside the salt shaker. When I found them, I sat down and stared at her name for a long time. I thought about the wedding ring I'd bought with money I earned baling hay for my uncle's farm. I thought about the vows we made in the same church her parents were married in. I thought about how she used to say the only thing she needed in this life was the smell of home and my arms around her. And then I laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. More like something broken rattling loose from inside me. 2 days later she was gone. Left in a car that wasn't hers, with a man who smiled too easily and wore cologne that reeked of ambition. Grayson. Of course it was him. I watched from the porch as she climbed into his vehicle, no hesitation, no glance back. She didn't even take her old boots. Left them by the back door like they didn't mean anything. I stood there, the heat of the afternoon crawling up my neck, the world feeling smaller by the second. The woman I'd shared a bed with, fought beside through droughts and sickness, through bills and birthdays, had walked away like she was stepping into a better version of herself. Rumors spread fast in towns like this. Some folks offered condolences. Some gave me the kind of quiet stares reserved for men they think might fall apart any second. But I didn't fall apart. I fed the animals. I fixed the roof on the shed. I paid off what little debt I had left. The farm may not be mine anymore, not on paper, but I still knew every inch of it. Still knew where the soil stayed cool in July, where the fox liked to sneak past the chicken coop, where Mary once carved our initials into a tree near the west fence. They can take the land. They can steal the life we built. But they can't rewrite the truth. I heard through the grapevine that Mary's already posting pictures. Rooftop bars. Brunches. Smiling like she won the lottery. She looks happy. Or at least filtered happy. Maybe she is. Maybe that's what she wanted all along. But I wonder how long that shine will last when the noise of the city dulls and she realizes money doesn't soften a man's heart, only hides it under silk and silver. He came back when the dust had barely settled, like some grinning prophet of progress wrapped in tailored linen and self-importance. Grayson Cole, the man who stole my wife and my land, returned to town with a stack of papers thick enough to choke a mule and the arrogance of someone who believed the world was built solely to kneel at his feet. He waltzed into the county office with his polished smile and a team of legal minds who wore smugness like cologne. Said he had all the documents. Said it was time to move forward. Said this place was ready for a transformation. I watched from a distance, arms crossed, mouth dry, heart heavy. He called it development. I called it desecration. Court sided with him. Of course it did. The judge leaned on loopholes and historical discrepancies, things nobody cared about for generations until a man like Grayson came sniffing around with pockets full of influence. He stood on the courthouse steps shaking hands, handing out promises about new roads, modern housing, better schools. Most folks lapped it up like barn cats at a milk bucket, dazzled by the idea of something new. Said it was time to move out of the shadows of old traditions. Said the town needed a facelift. But they didn't know what he really wanted. He didn't care about the community. He wanted control. A clean slate. A new playground where he could plant steel and glass and name it after himself. Meanwhile, I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back and the memories clawing at my chest. The farm was gone. The deed flipped. Even the soil under my boots belonged to him now. Mary hadn't just left me. She'd helped him pave the way, all while flashing that smile like she'd discovered some grand truth the rest of us couldn't comprehend. But there was one line they didn't cross, not yet. The mayor, to her credit, didn't touch my savings or my personal property. Said there was no need. Said she didn't want to fight. I think part of her pitied me, a man gutted and left standing in the ruins of what used to be his world. She kept her distance, and I let her. I didn't need sympathy. I needed a plan. That's when something in me shifted. You can only lose so much before the fear burns off and all that's left is clarity. I stopped mourning and started thinking. If Grayson wanted to build an empire, I'd become the crack in his foundation. I knew this town better than any map or blueprint ever could. I knew its rhythms, its secrets, its buried skeletons. I knew which old contracts hadn't been digitized, which survey markers were placed wrong back in the 60s, which pieces of land were quietly entangled in forgotten disputes. While he planned buildings, I started studying. Archives. Land records. Engineering layouts. I visited the library more times in 2 weeks than I had in the last decade. I didn't speak much. I just watched, listened, connected the dots. I paid visits to old-timers who barely remembered their own birthdays but still clung to stories passed down from when their grandparents helped settle this place. I found inconsistencies, small ones, but real. Enough to raise questions. Enough to begin unraveling the neat little package Grayson had wrapped himself in. He underestimated me. Most men like him do. They see a weathered face and a pair of calloused hands and assume there's nothing dangerous under the surface. But I've lived through droughts, floods, the death of both parents, and now the slow betrayal of everything I once held dear. I don't need a suit or a title. What I need is time. And I've got plenty of that now. I started compiling things, documents, maps, old tax records. I took notes. Took photos. Found a few local business owners who weren't as sold on Grayson's dream as they pretended to be. Men who owed me favors. Women who remembered the taste of his false promises. I wasn't loud about it. I smiled when I saw him. Nodded politely. Played the part of the defeated man. But inside, I was sharpening every piece of truth I could find, turning it into something he wouldn't see coming. This wasn't about getting the land back. Not anymore. This was about ensuring that he lost everything he thought he'd gained. And maybe, just maybe, making sure he knew exactly who was behind it when it all started to crumble. They say revenge doesn't build a future. Maybe that's true. But I'm not trying to build anything anymore. I'm trying to burn down the lies. The question is, when it all starts falling apart, will he even realize how deep the roots go, or will he only notice when it's too late to dig them out? The thing about small towns is people remember. They remember who lent them a hand when their barn roof caved in during a storm, who helped shovel snow off Main Street so the church potluck could still happen, who sat with them in the hospital when their daughter had her appendix out. They also remember who made promises and then broke them, who shook hands with one face and stabbed backs with the other. Grayson Cole didn't understand that when he rolled in with his investors and drone footage and glossy proposals. He thought he could wave money in front of everyone like a magician's cape and we'd all fall in line, dazzled and drooling. But people here are slower to trust, and after he took my land, after word got around about what he was really planning, high-end condos, a shopping district, turning our farmland into a lifestyle brand, folks began to see through the illusion. I started talking to people. At the diner. At church. At the hardware store. Quiet conversations, nothing flashy. And one by one, people started sharing their own stories. A cousin who'd been promised a contract and never got paid. A neighbor whose property was now boxed in by temporary fencing even though no one had gotten permission. An old man who'd been told his water rights were safe, only to find out construction had already diverted a creek that fed his well. Anger has a way of spreading when you realize you're not the only one carrying it. Soon, we were a group, not just me, but a small battalion of farmers, store owners, welders, and retirees, each with a score to settle. We didn't wear uniforms or hold rallies. That wasn't our style. We disrupted slowly, strategically. Someone loosened a few bolts on the backhoe at the job site. Another guy rerouted delivery trucks by reporting imaginary accidents on the road ahead. Sprinklers mysteriously flooded the foundation pits overnight. A few, anonymous, complaints to the state led to surprise inspections that halted work for days at a time. We weren't criminals. We were creative. We played by the rules, mostly, but we stretched them so far they forgot where they started. Then came the real break. An old classmate of mine, Mike, worked in the regional tax office. We hadn't talked in years, but when he heard what was going on, he reached out. Said he'd done some digging after seeing Grayson's name pop up in some flagged transactions. Turns out, Mr. Cole had a habit of funneling money through shell companies registered to people who didn't exist. Claimed huge deductions on construction materials that were never actually purchased. Underreported earnings on previous developments, probably assuming no one would ever look twice. But now someone was. Mike couldn't act officially without blowing his cover, but he gave us enough to start connecting the dots. We documented everything. Built a file thicker than a phone book. Then we got an idea, set a trap. One of the men in our group, Jack, had worked in contracting for years. He still had contacts and a company name that sounded legitimate. We had Jack approach Grayson with a proposal. Offer to speed up permits and smooth over some city resistance, if the price was right. We needed Grayson to bite, to make the mistake of being who he truly was in front of someone wearing a wire. At first, Grayson played coy. Asked questions, danced around the topic. But then he agreed to a private dinner. Said he liked creative solutions. At that dinner, Jack brought a recording device tucked in a pack of cigarettes. We got everything. Grayson offering cash in exchange for pushing things through, and promising bonuses if the project moved forward without interference. He even named a city planner he said he'd already taken care of, which led us to another thread we hadn't even pulled yet. When we reviewed the recording, there was no doubt. It was him. His voice, his face, his words. We didn't go to the press yet. We didn't go to the police. Not immediately. Because if we moved too early, he might wriggle out of it like men like him always do. We needed more. Something final. Something undeniable. By the time we had everything we needed, it didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like justice wearing old boots and work-worn hands. We had timelines, audio recordings, bank transfers, shell company records, falsified permit applications, witness statements, and enough inconsistencies in his tax filings to make a whole career for some eager young auditor. We didn't celebrate. We didn't toast with beer bottles or slap each other on the back. We just sat around a table in Jack's garage, the one with the broken fridge and the oil stains on the concrete, passing folders like sacred scripture, double-checking everything. We knew once we moved, it had to be clean. No leaks. No sloppiness. This had to hit all at once, like a hammer from the sky. But somehow Grayson found out. Maybe it was a slip from someone who talked too loud at the co-op. Maybe it was one of the town clerks who still liked the taste of big city promises. However it happened, he knew. Not all the details, but enough to make him nervous. He didn't show up himself. Men like him never do. Instead, he sent someone to my door, none other than the mayor, dressed in her best attempt at friendly concern, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she wanted to talk. Said she didn't like how divided the town was becoming. Said she wished we could all find a solution that benefited everyone. I let her speak until she ran out of carefully chosen words, then told her that whatever favor she owed Grayson, whatever deal she thought might still be worth salvaging, she could keep it. Because she wasn't anyone to me anymore. Not after what she let happen. She tried to leave me with a warning cloaked in civility, said that taking on a man like Grayson came with consequences. I smiled and said I was counting on it. That same evening we moved. Files were sent out in every direction. Physical copies delivered by hand to the nearest regional office of the state tax authority. A copy sent overnight to a local journalist with a reputation for chasing stories others were too timid to touch. A flash drive left anonymously at the police station, addressed to the deputy who'd grown up 2 streets over from my father. Even a copy sent to a senator's office, just to add a little fire to the wind. The story caught faster than any of us expected. One moment it was just ours, a pile of evidence guarded in silence. The next, it was everywhere. Headlines. Radio segments. Town whispers giving way to regional noise. They arrested Grayson within 72 hours of the story breaking. Tried to keep it low-key, but the media was already on him. They got photos of him walking into the courthouse, flanked by lawyers who looked more panicked than he did. But the press didn't just focus on the financial crimes. They ran the whole story, how he came to a town promising progress, bought land through legal gray areas, made shady deals with city officials, promised jobs he never intended to deliver, and bullied families out of their homes with lawyers and paperwork instead of bulldozers. When the full scope of his tax fraud came to light, even the federal authorities stepped in. The court hearings were long, loud, and well attended. Testimonies from contractors he stiffed, emails showing bribery discussions, audit reports revealing years of unpaid taxes, whistleblower statements from 2 former assistants who finally came forward once they saw he wasn't untouchable anymore. He was sentenced to over 30 years, with the possibility of more pending additional charges. His properties were seized. His accounts frozen. His name, once printed in glossy brochures, now sat in the black ink of court transcripts. But this story didn't end with bars and handcuffs. Because once the machine starts turning, it doesn't stop on its own. More questions started surfacing. About how he was allowed to buy up so much land so fast. About the officials who approved zoning changes overnight. About the developers tied to his company names, which turned out to be mirrors of mirrors, nothing real behind the glass. And just when we thought we might get a moment to breathe, something strange happened. A man none of us recognized started asking around town. Said he was a journalist working on something bigger. Said he thought Grayson was just one head of a much larger beast. I offered him coffee and listened. What he told me made my hands go cold. Because apparently, Grayson wasn't acting alone. And the names tied to his investments reached far beyond our county lines.